It's time to talk LSU baseball with Mike Scarborough and Kendall Rogers of D1Baseball. This is Batter Up.
All right, welcome in episode 5, Batter Up with Kendall Rogers. LSU finally getting into SEC play. A lot of people, I think more than any year that I can remember, people just absolutely chomping at the bit for SEC play. We're recording this before about an hour before LSU plays their second game against North Dakota State. Was going to be at 1 o'clock. Now it's a 4 o'clock. Kendall and I have talked about it before. Jay Johnson and these weird start times during the week. But things are going to start getting interesting. Mississippi State this weekend. Kendall, what's up, man? And what's on your mind?
Man, I tell you what, I'm excited about conference play. I think if you look around the country right now, I think it's a very wide open landscape, and there's no league I think that is more wide open, at least across the board, as the SEC. I mean, you could really take Missouri out of the picture, but outside of Missouri, I mean, like Ole Miss started to figure things out a little bit. Mississippi State, and we'll find out kind of what it's made of this weekend, but they're playing better despite the midweek loss to South Al. Then you look at the Arkansas, LSU. A&M, Florida, or Tennessee's been powerful. Florida's kind of the team right now that we're all very curious to see how they play against A&M this weekend, because A&M has been so good and Florida's been just so average. And so, how does Florida look this weekend? So to me, just so many storylines. And then on top of that, you have Wes Johnson, the former LSU pitching coach, who is off to a really nice start at Georgia. Charlie Condon's been an absolute beast at the plate, but again, is Georgia that good? I don't think so. We'll find out. But, I mean, they're off to a really good start. So a lot of questions that we have will be answered here in short order.
Well, we've talked about it throughout these reports leading up to it that LSU's SEC schedule is brutal, but whose isn't? There's nowhere to hide. Maybe you like a certain series at home versus away, but
yeah,
everybody's got something, and everybody's either in that realm where they're in your top 10 or they're doing something that you didn't think they were going to do, and you're wondering if they're for real at this point.
Yeah, I kind of go back to a conversation I had with Tim Jameson, who ironically enough is now the pitching coach in Missouri. But when Missouri entered the SEC, he was a head coach in Missouri and had a lot of success in the Big 12. And I remember one time, I saw Missouri's team in the airport at Hartsville-Jackson in Atlanta, and I saw him off in the corner. I've known the guy forever, but he looked worn out. He looked tired, exhausted. And I was like, "Hey, coach, man, you all right? You look like you might be a little under the weather." He's like, "Nah, man." He goes, "It's just this league's so different." He goes, in the Big 12, you can kind of come up for air a little bit, whereas in this league, man, if you're going to get punched in the mouth, and if you can't get back up, you're going to be in so big of a hole that you can't even get out of it. So I just think that's the one differentiator with this league versus some other leagues, that there's just you cannot get air. You've got to have a short-term memory, and that goes for winning and losing. Because LSU can go to Mississippi State this weekend, sweep the Bulldogs, and they could come home. And I get Florida hasn't played well, but they could come home and lose 2 out of 3 to Florida. And Florida certainly, if they were able to win the first 2, could sweep them with Cags in the mouth. Would I predict that? Absolutely not. But in this league, that could happen. You wouldn't be like, "Oh my gosh, that's the most surprising thing in the world."
Well, right now Arkansas is your number 1 team. LSU's number 2.
Yeah.
And what do you have? 6 SEC teams in the top 10, or is it 7?
That's pretty good.
What is the most y'all ever had?
I want to say we had 7 at one point last year. I think the biggest thing for me is who will arise as the cream of the crop out of that group. I'll say this: I've seen all of those teams so far, and whether it's multiple streaming options or seeing them in person, I've seen three or 4 of those teams in person. I'll say this: I think at the end of the year, I think we'll end up liking LSU the best, just because I think the bullpen is really good, and I think the offense really works at bats. I think as the season goes on, the guys that are just working really good at bats are going to end up putting up really good numbers. I think the other teams, for me, I think I'm most bullish on is probably Tennessee. I just think when you look at their offense top to bottom, it is crazy dangerous. And when you look at their pitching staff, I mean, they've got a really good 1-2-3 punch. I mean, if they can get AJ Russell back, they're ultra dangerous. I think for me, I think Arkansas, and it's kind of funny because Arkansas is number 1, right? But I think Arkansas on the mound is excellent. I'm very curious to see its offense in the SEC. And then for A&M, I mean, they've like checked every single box so far. But I mean, they had one weekend where they played really good competition, or I say really good competition. They played good competition for the most part. Other than that, their schedule hasn't been great. So those are the two teams I'm very curious to see how they do this weekend and beyond, because I think they're the two teams out of that group that might have the most uncertainty for me.
You can tell me it's none of my business, but how many of you guys have input and vote on y'all's top 25?
Right now, we've got 4. So it's me, Aaron, Joe Healy, and Mike Rooney. So it's really interesting. One thing we've tried to do is get representation from across the country. Aaron is North Carolina. Historically more of an SEC or ACC background. Joe is kind of a jack of all trades background, and then Runes is more of a West Coast kind of person. And then, obviously me being in the middle of the country, I kind of gravitate maybe a little bit more towards the Big 12 and the SEC. So, I mean, there are a lot of cooks in the kitchen, but I kind of feel like we tend to have a pretty good process. I mean, obviously the big storyline this week is that we did not have Florida State ranked. Obviously that's looking like a little bit of an iffy decision.
So with 4 voters, don't expect to see a little parentheses with how many first place votes, right?
Correct. No, exactly. Like I'll not to throw people under the bus here, but like I've seen other rankings in college baseball, they're like, tallying up poll numbers, whereas I know for a damn fact that like they don't have more than 2 people voting for it. So, our thing is, we see the most games and we're pretty confident in our rankings. Florida State is the outlier.
To be fair, if you opened it up, I can't imagine how difficult it would be to find qualified baseball people
correct
that could vote in these polls like you could in college football and college basketball.
College basketball would be just as hard as baseball because there's a ton of teams. Football, I think, makes it a little easier because it's less teams. And, for the most part, LSU is going to be good every year in football. Alabama is going to be good every year in football. So it's a little bit easier to kind of predict those things. Whereas baseball, I mean, as we're seeing this year, like there's been some teams that, we didn't expect to be as good as they are, like Florida State. And there's some teams that have kind of slipped a little bit since the start of the season.
All right. Well, this weekly segment, Batter Up with Kendall Rogers and D1Baseball, is brought to you by attorney Kenneth P. Haynes. And let's go ahead and hear from Kenny.
Kenny Haynes is a proud 1989 graduate of LSU Law School with a passion for justice. Kenny stands out as the only lawyer in the state, board certified in both appellate practice and family law. Drawing from 34 years of trial experience, Kenny has navigated the most complex aspects of real people's lives. If you need help in Northwest Louisiana with a family issue, legal issue, or a highly skilled trial attorney, call Kenny 318-222-2100. And speaking of winning, Kenny would like to recognize our 2023 national champions and congratulate coaches Kim Mulkey and Jay Johnson. Go Tigers!
And of course, Kenny's the unofficial attorney of TigerBait.com. And he submitted several questions for you, Kendall. He says, have you seen anything different in Tommy White that helps answer his slow start? While his average is still over 300, his power numbers and RBI numbers are way down.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for him is, and he'll have to make adjustments as the season goes on, but I think the biggest thing for Tommy is that teams are going to pitch him differently. I think if you look at LSU's lineup overall, to me, it's dangerous because you have so many guys that can have so many good at-bats. But on the other side of the coin, I feel like teams can kind of pitch around him to some degree or give him really bad offerings, and it doesn't hurt him maybe as much as it did last year, if that makes sense. So I think he'll make adjustments. I think LSU will continue to get better offensively and allow him to get a little bit more of a groove. But, yeah, he has been a little different in terms of just the sheer kind of star power, but he's still a really good player, man.
I tell you what, last night, of course, LSU with a 6-1 win over NDSU, and again playing again today. But Anderson only went 2 and 2, a little over 2 innings, and Jay said last night in the interview, which we were the only outlet there to film it, in his post game, is making it obvious that he's planning to want to have him available possibly for this weekend. So that's why he didn't pitch as much. So that's adding.
Well,
even
that kind of
more
leads me into this. I mean, obviously he's pitched really well, but like I'm guessing it's as a long reliever. I mean, I don't think he's replacing anybody. I mean, Luke Holman was awesome yet again.
right.
Gage Jump and Thatcher Hurd the series finale. Even though LSU lost, it wasn't because of Thatcher Hurd. He pitched really well. So, I don't. My guess is it's going to have to be a long relief role for him or none.
Yeah, I think he just wants to be able to have him available if he needs him. Another question that he says, the umpiring was supposed to enlarge the strike zone this year. He says he hasn't seen it. What about you?
Yeah, no, I haven't seen. I've seen some pretty tight strike zones and really inconsistent strike zones throughout the year. To be honest with you, it continues to be an issue. Besides the the interference rule at first are the two big things for me right now. So tell you what, if the ball is the way it is, the bat is the way it is, and we continue to have tight strike zones, there's going to be a lot of runs scored this year in SEC play.
Well, of course, LSU's going to Starkville. And what is your take on this Bulldog baseball team?
Yeah, man, I tell you what, I think they're better. I do. I think they're much better. I think they handle adversity well. They've had a couple of setbacks this year already where they've really bounced back well in the next game. I think the biggest thing for me is they're certainly much better on the mound. I mean, we'll see if Nate Doan pitches this weekend. He came out of a game last week with an injury. That could actually be a huge storyline this weekend if he can't pitch. I haven't seen an update on him in the past couple of days, but 10 strikeouts, 2 runs allowed, and 6 in the third last weekend. Cal Stevens been a really nice addition from Purdue to Starkville. He's done a really nice job. And so I just think their pitching's been much better, and that was kind of their bugaboo last year. They scored runs last year, but boy, their pitching was brutal at times last season. So I think the biggest thing for me is when I look at Mississippi State is, they're going to make a run at LSU this weekend at some point. This is a big weekend for them. They view this weekend as not only a rivalry series for them, especially when you look at kind of the chippiness historically. You remember back in the Mason Cats days when LSU and State would get chippy in Starkville. MSU is going to look at this as a statement weekend, as a program tide turner type of weekend. So they are going to give LSU all they can handle. They're going to throw the kitchen sink at them, and I'll be very curious. And I think I have an idea of how LSU will respond to that in a good way. But it'll be interesting to see how LSU response to that push from MSU. But this is a big, big weekend for the Bulldogs, to say the least.
Well, it's again, like I was saying earlier, I think everybody's been ready for SEC play. You got a little bit of a taste of big time baseball in Houston, but people are, especially this week. There's been people complaining about playing 2 games with North Dakota State because they're just, they're ready to get into SEC play. But any storylines this weekend around the SEC that you're looking forward to? Any first SEC game weekend matchups that intrigue you more than others?
Yeah, I tell you what, I think it's more so like, is there a matchup I don't like in the SEC this weekend? I mean, I think if you look across this conference, I mean, there's so many intriguing matchups. I mean, I look at Oxford just up the road from Stark Vegas with Ole Miss and South Carolina. Again, Ole Miss feels like they've kind of turned the tide a little bit in the positive direction. South Carolina, they have the series loss to Clemson. How do they fare on the road against Ole Miss? Georgia, Kentucky, going to UK in the heat of basketball season is not easy. There's going to be about 300 people there, and it's probably going to be chilly. So that's going to be a test for Georgia. Auburn and Vandy, I think, obviously is really interesting. I saw Vandy a couple of weeks ago. Really, really liked what they had on the mound. That Minute Maid tournament with LSU. Then Auburn, obviously, off to a really nice start. Cooper McMurray continues to hit for power. Missouri and Arkansas is the one kind of weakling. And then you have Tennessee, Alabama, and A&M, Florida. I think Tennessee, Alabama, for me, this is an interesting series for me for Alabama. After a midweek loss, see how they respond from that. Ben Hess is going to have to pitch at a high level for them to win that series. Then A&M and Florida. I think we find out so much about both these teams. A&M, I mean, they've looked like a world beater, right? Like they've looked like the 1917 Yankees. But when they're playing a ultra talented team on the road, how do they fare? Is Braden Montgomery, Jace Lavalette going to continue what they've done so far? Is their pitching Ryan Prager? Other than Luke Holman, Ryan Prager has been the most dominant pitcher in the Southeastern Conference. Does that continue in Gainesville? And then for Florida, when you're staring down the barrel of a trip to Baton Rouge next weekend and a team that loves to beat you, like LSU and LSU fans, this weekend's important because I think if you play the way you have the past couple of weeks, I think if you're Florida, you're really looking at probably losing your first 2 series in SEC play if you don't play well. And as we all know, that can really put you behind the 8 ball. So, yeah, I mean, I can't wait. It's going to be an awesome weekend, and thankfully I'll be at home to just kind of watch all the action.
Well, I tell you what, I'm imploring LSU fans, baseball fans, there's no better outlet for them to subscribe than D1Baseball.com. And not only does Kendall and his group, they're the premier nationally in college baseball, but the job they do covering the SEC is second to none. And tell them how they can get subscribed, Kendall, and any specials you might run and be running and how they can get on board with that. Because you guys are blowing out the content, and you need to check out their YouTube channel as well.
Yeah, man. I tell you what, we just launched some forums in the last 24 hours. That's been something I've honestly been trying to do for about 5 years. Finally got around to it. So we got a new premium board there. I'll be doing a lot of updates from just random conversations about with coaches, obviously, as we get the coaching carousel season and transfer season. But yeah, man, we'll have a lot of coverage this weekend. I want to say maybe Mark is going to be in Start Vegas. No, maybe Aaron's in Start Vegas. We'll have LSU MSU coverage this weekend. And obviously, more coverage from LSU Florida next weekend. So, yeah, it is hopping right now. But tell you what, I wouldn't have it any other way. Should be a lot of fun.
Awesome, man. Well, that's another episode 5 of Batter Up with Kendall Rogers and D1 Baseball. We'll do it again next week. Thanks to attorney Kenneth P. Haynes for sponsoring. And have a good weekend, Kendall. And we'll talk about it next week.
You got it, brother. Be good.
All right, man.